So what about the challenge that things change over time? Right. Things get more elaborate, and Jesus goes from just being a wise teacher to a supernatural Son of God over a period of time.
Right. Well, you trust your Gospels? Oh, the earliest Gospel's Mark. You know that, right? The last Gospel is probably John. And you trust these things. Well, in Mark, there's no passion story. Jesus isn't hardly even described as divine at all in Mark. Oh, but by the time we get to John, 30 years later, oh, he's already God now. That's the kind of the accusation, right? That Jesus changes over time. And there's a guy we know, Bart Ehrman, out of North Carolina, who's written a lot of books on this. He just wrote a recent book, 2 books ago now, called How Jesus Became God. Because the Jesus of Nazareth, he would say, was very simple, and then over time he got distorted. They added the miracle accounts. They added the resurrection. They added the high Christology of Jesus until finally you have the divine Christ of Christianity. I suspected that too because I was a committed philosophical naturalist. I rejected miracles. So I thought those miracles cannot have been written early. Something was written early, but that stuff wasn't in there. That stuff had to be late. And so I just needed to know, was the miraculous nature of Jesus in the earliest accounts? So here's how we tested it. If you have a crime scene, and I find a casing in the crime scene, and then 30 years later I bring the casing to court and I say there's an extractor pin mark on the casing that identifies it to the suspect's gun, that's why I want you to convict this suspect, you could rightly ask, well, how do I know that that extractor pin mark was on the original? Someone could have pulled it out of property, 15 years later, etched on the extractor pin mark, put it back in property, and now it's been altered. That's a fair accusation, I think. How do I know that that mark was on the original? Here's how I know. I go back and I ask the question, was there an officer there back in the day, 1980, who wrote a report, a supplemental report, where he described the extractor pin mark? Because if he did, I know it wasn't added later. And then he gave it to somebody. The next guy who takes that piece of evidence, he writes a report describing what he received from the first officer. And then the next officer does the same thing. And we do it through time to the crime lab and from the crime lab all the way to the courtroom. And now I have report after report after report to see if anything's changed on the casing. Well, there's this is, by the way, called the chain of custody. Link by link, we look and see who is each link and is it changing. Do the same thing with the Gospels. Let's take a look at the Gospel of John. Was he really that divine in the beginning? Well, the first officer at the scene who wrote a report was a guy named John. He described what he saw in Jesus. But how do I know that he really wrote that? Well, who did he give it to? Who is the next link in the chain? 3 guys were his personal students, Ignatius, Polycarp, and Papias. Now, after John died, these 3 guys became leaders in the local church. If you didn't have John's gospel, you could just ask them, what did John say about Jesus? And they wrote local letters to local congregations. They're not in your Bible. They're ancient documents. We still have them. We can read them and see what did they say they learned from John. And they had a student named Irenaeus, and he had a student named Hippolytus. And you can go through the entire list of history and look at each link in the chain to see, is the story of Jesus becoming more extravagant? And here's what I discovered right away, is that if you start early, everything about Jesus you're stuck with. You may not like it, but it starts very early. And the very first people that John talks to will describe him as being divine, claimed to be God, rose from the dead as God, worked miracles as God, born of a virgin, died on a cross, rose from the grave, ascended into heaven, seated at the right hand of the Father. Every doctrine that we hold dear today is present immediately in the first story of Jesus. So you're stuck with this weird deal. You have people who are telling us something, and they never change their story. And we can document it all the way back to the life of Christ. What do we do with this? What do I do with this? That's where I found myself. I was stuck with the miraculous Jesus of Christianity. And every way I tried to kind of look at it and see, is it a lie? What's motivating him to lie? I tested it every way I could. I was stuck with it.